Wow, we have a crowd. We have a crowd tonight. This is great. How many people are new to the .NET Consortium? Wow. Well, welcome. Thank you. How many are repeats? Awesome. Welcome back. And how many people didn't raise their hand? There's always one. Great. Well, either way, whether you're new here or you've been here before, thank you for coming. Very happy to have you. We've got a great presentation tonight. Welcome to the Indy.NET Consortium. If you've never been here before or you have, we've got presentations all the way through January of next year. They're all booked up, so you can go take a look on the meetup site. This is part of a two-part series. Tonight's presentation, we've got Erick Moore, who's a senior cloud architect from Microsoft, presenting. And this is a multi-presentation series. So next month's also going to be DevOps, so we're going to continue, dive a little deeper, take a different angle. So very excited about tonight. Thank you, Erick, for coming here. Let's see. We've got prizes tonight. More than one. Like I was saying before, I went to Kansas City Developer Conference, KCDC, last month, pardon me. And I brought a bunch of swag back. So please take shirts, stickers, webcam covers, etc. Just grab them. Otherwise, I'm just gonna throw them out because nobody keeps the swag after like the one meeting where you try handing it to all your coworkers and friends, right? We've all done that. Yeah, you're just trying to get rid of it and ask yourself, why did I pick all this up? But I did it for you. So we have a few things to hand out tonight. So incentive to stay. Who didn't get a ticket? Who doesn't have a ticket for the raffle? Okay, you're out of luck. I'm kidding. I'll just raise your hand when I'm done, and I will hand it to you. I've got the tickets over there. We've got a webcam cover. Ooh, so if you want to hide what you're doing, just not the audio, there you go. Leave it up to the imagination. We've got, don't look too much into that. Don't read too much into that. I also got a cool $200 Azure credit card. It's not an Azure credit card, it's an Azure credit card. So it's not mine. So we'll be handing that out. And then of course, as usual, we'll hand out an Ozcode license. If you've never heard me go on and on about Ozcode, I still love Ozcode. Great debugging tool. So yay, we'll be handing one of those out. I think those are like $100-something a year, so that's pretty cool. A special thanks to our sponsors, Theoris, 1150 Academy, the Ozcode folks, yay, and Launch Fishers. Launch actually gives us access to this, and if you've been here before, you might have noticed we have access to the full AV system now. Huh? Did anyone notice that? It's awesome.
We had to fix all that.
Huh?
We had to fix all that over the course of the past 7 days or so.
Oh my gosh.
For graduation.
Oh, okay. I thought it was like for us.
Oh no.
I'm like, dude, we don't pay you, so that works out great for us. Well, thank you. Thank you for doing that.
I didn't.
Oh, you didn't? Well, then I take it back.
Actually, wait, yeah, I did.
Oh. Now I don't know. So, anyway, is anyone looking for a job? Okay, we got people looking for jobs. Great. Who has jobs to offer? Does anyone have jobs to offer? Cool. Brent's got jobs. Okay, everyone's got jobs. So, we'll start with Brent.
Yeah, so obviously my company, Theoris, has been helping put on the consortium since I've been a part of it, 14 months. Long story short, just trying to bridge the gap from talent needs with our clients and obviously the talent pool here. Save the boring spiel, but if DevOps is something you're of interest, I do have everybody's name that attends the meetings. I'll send out some messages and feel free to respond, but if you see me a link to request, please don't reject it and accept it, and if nothing else, network together. So that's really all I have.
Awesome. So make sure that if for all the people that are going to be offering jobs, especially Brent, if you're interested in an opportunity or you're not happy with what you're doing now, it's always a possibility, reach out to these people and give them your information because these connections help. They get you gigs. Thank you, Brent. Who else had jobs to offer?
I'm not offering a job, obviously, because I'm like 18, but the company I'm working at is offering a job. They need an experienced front-end developer. So that way I don't have to do it. So if you guys could help us, please. You're going to be pulling data from API endpoints and using, your choice of framework. As long as it's making it.
Remember, he said your choice of framework.
Not how it's good, but that's not, yeah.
I'm going to write everything in Pascal. It's my choice.
I'm Jamie from Allied Solutions. Basically, what these two also said plus more. We're looking for a lot of front-end developers, a lot of back-end developers. We do a lot of C# .NET Core work. We're also looking for some DevOps engineers. So very much that.
Great. Is anyone else offering jobs? There we go.
My name's Greg. I'm a technical recruiter with Saudi Solutions downtown. We have a lot of stuff, full stack, .NET, obviously similar to what some of these other guys said. So happy to talk, grab coffee, and talk about some of the opportunities. Thanks.
Thanks.
Well, we have Tim Conner with Zotec Partners, hiring all engineering roles, front-end, back-end, DBAs, product support. We're into revenue cycle management for healthcare, specializing in automating, and hopefully so we love to speak with people and meet people, trying to get them in that way.
Great. Well, wonderful. Thank you all. So hey, if you're looking for a job, we got a lot of options there. And if you're offering jobs, sounds like you have people you can all talk to. Maybe, hand the cards out. Fun. Great. Well, without further ado, I'm going to present Erick Moore. Where's Erick? There he is. Still here. And he's got the 15-inch Surface Book. I only have the 13-inch, so he has a more powerful GPU than I do. Well, great. Give it up for Erick. Oh, like power supply too.
Yeah, why not?
This is cool. I'm glad we have the same machine, basically.
That works. There it is. It's up.
Sweet.
Perfect.
Oh, I do want to point out two other things. One, we usually get beer afterwards. How many people want to get beer? So I can surprise the hell out of 4-day Ray. I guess we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 11, 50. Okay. So afterwards, after we clear everything up, we'll all end over at 4-day Ray, and we'll figure something out. It's a Wednesday, so we should be able to get seats. I'll try making a phone call to see if they'll hold up like 12 seats for us. So hopefully you were all serious when we said you raised your hand. And who didn't get tickets? Okay, cool. Hit me up as I go back there. And you're all set?
I'm all set.
Sweet.
Okay, very good. So, small world. Actually, I cover mostly local accounts, but I also am part of a 5-state area for Microsoft. The Zotec is actually one of my customers. So I've been working recently with Ben on the analytics side and some of the infrastructure folks over there on network connectivity and some other stuff. So kind of a small world. And coincidentally, my first job out of school, 10 years at a revenue cycle management company up in Chicago. So, all right, let's get started. We'll do a demo. I'll probably stop early to do one thing that will make sense later, but let's get into it. So this is kind of the challenge, right? And it's interesting, some of these numbers that you see and you will see and will continue to see over time, where the average tenure of company on the Fortune 500 back in 1965 was about 35 years. By 90, it was 20, and by 2026, it's projected to be about 14 years. So about 50% of the companies today that are on the Fortune 500 are going to be replaced, and a big part of that is how quickly and rapidly things are changing. And everyone who's been in IT knows things always change quickly and rapidly in IT, but the issue now is every company, if they're not a digital company, they should be. And getting out in front of that and helping these companies make that transformation and shift to the digital economy is super important, and it's more important now than ever. And the people in this room are leading that charge, right? Developers are kind of the heart of all of that. So the productivity, the innovation, all of these things, it's great to have, but the code needs to be realized functioning products that customers can use. So super important to optimize things, super important to optimize delivery, super important to minimize downtime, disruption, while still being able to add new features and capabilities. So this slide, this one always kind of cracked me up because it always reminded me, anyone remember Gartner's bimodal IT? It was around for like 15 seconds. It was, everyone was talking about bimodal IT, this is gonna be the future, you're gonna have two sides, one side that's gonna be innovative, another side that's gonna keep the lights on, and what they meant was they'll handle the mainframe, and no one's gonna touch that, everything's gonna stay the same, but that doesn't work. And we knew it wasn't gonna work, and Agile kind of broke that, right? Because if you look at something like that where you go, okay, we're gonna have this legacy anchor system that we know we can't innovate on, but we have to have it because it's at the core of our business. The problem is, how much can you really innovate, right? If that system has my customer records and has things that I need to get access to, but I'm not allowed to touch it, you know, what am I really doing as a developer? How can this work? And really, the whole concept behind Agile and, you know, getting more flexible in your approach and, you know, doing the right planning and tracking work and everything else, the big goal of that is to be able to confidently make changes, right? I can make changes to production systems and not worry that something's gonna go down or I'm gonna break something because we automate a lot of it, right? So I kind of touched on this. You guys are at the heart of what companies are trying to do. Again, you know, a lot of my customers are looking at commercial over the, you know, off the shelf software. That's kind of the way a lot of people do it. That only gets you so far. But really the core set of innovation is on the IP that, you know, the companies are bringing in and owning and trying to innovate and make new rapid features to outdo your competition, right? In cloud, in Azure, where I live, it is an arms race. And in the short time that I've been at Microsoft, which is, you know, coming up on 2 years, I mean, it's gone 180 on what we've added. And I have customers that tell me, well, you didn't have that feature didn't exist. When did you look? Well, 6 months ago. Oh, well, geez, you know, we've had that for 5 months now, right? I mean, we're always adding and changing things, and that's what you have to do to stay ahead of your competition, and that's where you guys really come into play. So this was coined by one of our DevOps engineers, right? It's the union of people, process, and products, and really, to me, it's more process than anything. Once we start talking about Agile and DevOps, it really is a process, and it takes time for companies to kind of make that shift. You always start small, and it's a wave, you know. You start with pick a project, right? Pick something that's got high value, run that as an Agile project, and off you go. Of course, Microsoft, with our infinite wisdom on naming, we have a product called DevOps, right? So really, really confusing when we talk DevOps. Are we talking about the process, or are we talking about our product, which is Azure DevOps? And by the way, you don't have to be in Azure to use Azure DevOps. It works everywhere with anything. It doesn't really matter. But one of the reasons that I love DevOps and one of the reasons that it's really taken off is because there are tons of metrics around how successful you can be when you adopt this kind of methodology, right? So you spend a whole lot less time doing rework. There's a whole lot less time remediating security issues because security is part of the process of DevOps. It's all integrated. Unplanned work, all of this stuff really reduces. And it's not shown on this chart, but the #1 indicator of whether or not a company is successful in their Azure Agile DevOps approach is if they've adopted this methodology, not just for development and software, but also for infrastructure. And that's typically the last part that comes in because infrastructure people are resistant to change, just like we all are. But it's a whole new methodology and a whole new process for them. It's kind of hard for them to conceptualize a lot of times. So our solution at Microsoft around the people, process, and products, the product here is Microsoft Azure DevOps. So if you're familiar with Team Foundation Server, TFES, this is kind of the rebranding of that, the recreation of that. Anyone ever use TFS or continue to use TFS? Handful of people, right? So this is the evolution of it, right? We started to make it a little more modular, you know, breaking out some of the components, making it a little less bulky. And it's been really, really good so far, and I'm a big fan of it. I've been using it ever since I started at Microsoft, and hopefully we'll have time to talk about what we do internally at Microsoft with Azure DevOps. We've got teams using it that don't develop anything, but pretty much everyone uses this tool for a lot of different things. So development, use whatever IDE you want, IntelliJ, Eclipse, Visual Studio, VS Code, whatever. The solution on the bottom here is what we'll go through tonight. You know, some of the Azure boards, repos, pipelines, artifacts, test plans, lab services, and then wrap it around, you know, your operational flows as well. So I'm gonna pause here, and we're gonna pop out and do one quick thing in the Azure portal, because we'll need this in a second. And I was a last second drop in for this presentation. I had no time to prep, so this will truly be a live demo. Cross your fingers, those are always fun. So I'm gonna spin up a new DevOps project first. So we'll create a DevOps project. This, by the way, I'll just clarify, for those that aren't familiar, you know, this is in Azure that I'm doing this. This is not how you would build a DevOps project if you were not using Azure, which you can do in Azure DevOps. But this is all come together in just a second. So we'll choose .NET, we can choose any framework we want, whatever, I can bring my own code. We'll keep it simple. I've got options here. If I choose .NET Core, that's gonna change what I have on the next slide. You know, I can do Kubernetes, I can do Linux. We'll go ahead and do just the standard ASP.NET. I'll do a web app. We'll give it a name. I'll pick the DevOps org. A handful, I don't know, let's see, net new test. How about that? Perfect. I can choose where I want it deployed, that looks fine. Once we get clearance that this worked, we'll hop back into the presentation and then come back and I'll show you what all of this did. Has anyone ever used this, by the way? DevOps project? They're awesome, right? Like, it's so cool. It builds all this stuff for you.
Is there much difference between building out a here versus just doing the regular project in Azure DevOps?
Yeah, good question. If for those that didn't hear it, is there a difference between building out a project here versus doing it in Azure DevOps? And yes, there's a pretty big difference. And there's two ends of the spectrum on this, right? So number one, and you'll see when we're done here, this builds a lot, right? So it actually is spinning up Azure services. It's also building for me, build and release pipelines. It's uploading my code. It's doing all of this automatically, right? And of course it failed. So I knew it. I had all these issues earlier today. I can make it work though, I promise. So I gotta think. I need a different tenant. So really what this is gonna do for us is automate that whole end-to-end process. But if you're very familiar with Azure DevOps, you know, you're probably gonna build your own pipelines, right? You're gonna build your own build release pipelines. You're gonna have your own test plans and everything else. But if you're unfamiliar with it, that's a very good starting spot that I just did. So let's go back. So do this again. There we go, everything's fine. I'm so confident this is gonna work. There it goes. I won't get into the details of why that other one didn't. I had a suspicion it wouldn't, but it has to do with identity, which, by the way, is like always the hardest thing. Role-based access, identity, nightmare, always. Okay, delivering with Azure DevOps. So we've got a few different sections, and you'll see once we get into the demo too, you can customize these project by project. So what do I want to include in a different DevOps project? Do I want to use boards, repos? Do I want to use pipelines? Do I want to use artifacts? I can pick and choose. So Azure boards, that's our Kanban board, right? So this is how I track work in progress. You've got a couple different process methods when you spin up a Azure DevOps environment. I can choose Scrum, I can choose Agile, I can choose Basic. We used to have Waterfall in there, but it's gone. But if you wanted to build a Waterfall process, you could. There's a custom process you can make. These boards, by the way, so Azure DevOps is really one of these things, especially if it's individual users, it's almost free. So it's free for 5 users, always. If you have MSDN licenses, you actually get a full license also. But for stakeholders, it's unlimited access for free, right? So a stakeholder would be someone in the business that's not going to be doing anything in the project, but maybe wants to look at something like a Kanban board, or maybe they want to look at a dashboard and see where the project is, or they want to look at the backlog for whatever reason, or see what the burn down rate is. That's free always for unlimited amount of stakeholders. Repos, again, you get unlimited number of private Git repos. So you see we also have TFVC repos. That was our own version of repository before we switched to Git internally at Microsoft. There were some challenges we had with Git initially due to basically the size of some of our legacy code base, right? So Windows is very, very big and very, very legacy. And you know, doing a a Git clone on the Windows repo took 12 hours, right? So we've since fixed that, but I don't see TFBC anymore except for kind of customers that have been using it and haven't migrated yet to Git. We acquired GitHub. This brings up the next logical question of where does GitHub fit in versus a private Git repo in Azure DevOps? And the answer is I don't know. I've got suspicions and I've heard rumors, and again, this is not founded, this is me just speculating, that we will be moving all of our stuff off of private Git repos into private GitHub repos, but we will see. So that's just my guess. It's going to be integrated some way, somehow. It's a new acquisition though, so it'll take time. Azure pipelines. So these are hosted pipelines you have available to you in Azure. You get a certain amount of build minutes for free, 730 every month. So that's a free build machine out there for you. It's hosted. We'll walk through kind of some of the options there. We even have Mac hosted pipelines. So if you're doing iOS development, you can build on actual Macs hosted for you in Azure. We also have private hosted pipelines as well. So if you didn't want to use an Azure hosted pipeline, you've got the ability to stand up your own build agent, connect it to the Azure DevOps instance, and leverage that. A use case there would be, I work with a customer now that's doing embedded OS development. So our build agents, they've got a lot of software installed on them. They do not have that specific software that they need for that embedded OS tool chain. So if they were using a hosted agent, what they would have to do is every time the agent would spin up, they'd have to install all their tool chain into it, and that would just take forever, right? So they use they use their own agent, install their own tools, but it's still called by the pipeline. So that's build pipelines. We also have release pipelines. So release pipelines are nice, they're visual. You can do pre and post deployment check-ins, gates, approvals, routed approvals, lots of different things you can set there. Really, really powerful and flexible. We'll go through all this in a live demo. Artifacts are exactly what you would expect, right? So they're artifacts for the code. We can publish and take artifacts from one step to the next, right? So as part of a build step, I can publish an artifact to the pipeline for release. It'll be picked up there, so lots of flexibility. Again, doesn't matter what it is, you can bring in your own software packages. And then Azure test plans, so these are also integrated. And you do get a certain amount of, there's load testing you can do in Azure as well. See that very commonly. That's a very common pattern in the cloud is, if you think about a traditional DTAP process, that QA or, test phase of your software deployment, it typically only instantiates at the time you need it, right? So they have a dev environment that's persistent, a prod environment that's persistent, and everything else is kind of ephemeral, because there's really not a need to keep around a like-for-like copy of prod when I only need to do it to load test or validate right before I push it into prod. So I mentioned this, GitHub. So this was one that I think everyone was holding their breath on when Microsoft bought GitHub. And I remember reading about all the people that were so angry and they were moving their code to Bitbucket and all the last. So they're like, Microsoft's going to ruin it. And I assume those people are probably my age and remember how much Microsoft hated open source and everything else. But it's changed, right? Satya has definitely changed it, and the changes we've made to GitHub have been great. Private repos were not a thing unless we're a paying customer of GitHub. We have since made those free for private use. So you can go get a private GitHub repo now. If you didn't want to share and collaborate on your code, which a lot of people don't, especially when it's ugly like my code is, and embarrassed of it. I don't want people to see it. I need someone to sanitize it for me first, and then I'll make it public and I'll look like a genius. Well, that's my trick. But everyone knows GitHub, I think, right? So still the #1 developer community on the planet. Still host all of these great open source projects. VS Code, which is kind of my IDE of choice. I'm not a full-time developer, so it does everything I need. It's nice, it's lightweight. Plugins, extensions are great. It really helps me a lot. Not as big and heavy as a Visual Studio or something like that. That has many more features that a full-time developer needs. But for me, VS Code is my go-to. React, Kubernetes, all of these things. And if you're not doing anything with Kubernetes, Microsoft, I think, is the #1 contributor now. Helm is kind of our big contribution to that community, Helm charts and everything else. So we do a whole lot there, and that is continuing to grow. So if you're not doing anything with Kubernetes yet, definitely take a look. It is super hot right now. Some people think it's going to be a bump in the road. I don't know. We'll see. It's very, very popular. We seem to be using it more and more internally also. So that's that bodes well for the future of Kubernetes and container technology. So this is an important one as well, right? So, you know, why do we buy GitHub, and you know, what does it mean for an organization? You know, to have happy developers, what does it mean? Well, you know, this is something you can take with you and tell your management. This is super important because the cost of hiring someone new, they say it's typically a 6 to 9 month period to get someone to the level of productivity that, you know, the other developer was at already. And what's 9 months salary, right? Now imagine you have that turnover on 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 developers. That's a lot of money every year. So it's super, super important to keep developers happy and engaged. Satya made a pretty shrewd observation. So when we were looking to buy GitHub, we paid a lot of money for GitHub. But what he did was he looked at LinkedIn and he looked at the postings for developers. And what he saw was we had way more job postings for developers than there were people to fill, right? Which meant that GitHub was a good acquisition because a place that's hosting all this code and all these developers is where we needed to be, because that is going to be the next big wave, and that's absolutely where things are headed. And people that don't know how to code should actually learn how to code, and you've probably all read the things about how that's going to be the new language of the future, right? It's the universal language of the coding. So DevOps does integrate with GitHub, so there's lots of ways to tap into that with boards and pipelines. And this is really super cool, right? So I mentioned you get 730 build hours per month for free. You get unlimited build minutes though for open source projects. So really, really cool. So free hosted parallel build agents. And we do charge in Azure DevOps on hosted pipelines for parallel agents. So I only have one in my subscription, and there are a lot of times where I'm waiting because I would love to have parallel builds, but if you contribute to an open source project, you've got the ability to do it. All right, let's go into the demo now. So hopefully, what we did work. All right. My deployment completed. So, what did this do, right? So this did a lot. So that going in there and specifying my framework and then specifying, you know, what I wanted installed and everything, it built it for me, and it actually went out and built me a full Azure DevOps environment. So if I look here, project homepage, that's actually going to bump me out into Azure DevOps. I've got build pipelines, release pipelines. I can see it did all this stuff for me. This is the actual website that it spun up, which is, you know, very, very simple and basic. But if I go to my project homepage, so this is going to launch me now into my Azure DevOps environment. So the summary page has nothing because, again, this just spun it up here. Dashboards, this is where I can add widgets, create widgets. I can bring in stuff from Marketplace, but lots of stuff's already built in. Wiki, you can tie in as well. Boards, again, this project has nothing because it didn't exist until a second ago. But what it does have is a repo, and it does have some files. So this was all built for me when I did that DevOps project. I can see my branch here. If I wanted to add more repos here, if I wanted to import a repository, I've got the option to do that. So lots of options and flexibility there. I can browse here, I can look at history, so traditional, you know, Git kind of flows all exist. I can see commits, which I'll have one, first commit. That comes by the nature of spinning up that project. But let's go down here and look at our build pipeline. So this is the thing that, you know, you asked, you know, what's the difference? So if I was to go now and say I want to build a new pipeline on my own, so I've got a DevOps project not tied to Azure or anything else, just Azure DevOps. I can say new build pipeline. This is what I would give. It's going to ask me a bunch of questions. So where's my code, right? Is it Bitbucket, GitHub, Enterprise, other Git, Subversion, Azure repos, whatever. And I am going to pause here for just 1 second to show you this. So, by the way, do I need to zoom in? I feel like this is probably too small. So it's kind of small on the screen.
Can everyone see?
Is that better? That's probably good, right? Okay, so we're moving towards a YAML experience here in the build pipelines. So I will say I am not 100% a fan of the YAML pipelines yet, because it does require some knowledge of YAML, and it also requires you to kind of know what you're doing. So I'll just show you. If I was to say, okay, my code is here, there's my repo, right? So far, so good. And you know what? Of course, I said this, and it's going to look a little bit different. But here's a starter pipeline. So here, now I'm dropped in. Now, what do? Right? To me, this isn't very intuitive, right? I don't know what to do here. So I can hit save and run, and it's going to do whatever this is, right? So, great. I'll show you the way I like to do it, the old way. I just talk about people don't like change. I like the old way. This is important though, because there are a couple things that aren't in YAML yet, right? So if you need some of these features, you have to do this. It's kind of hidden down here. Use Classic Editor. So I would suggest using the Classic Editor. So same thing, where's my code? There it is, fine, continue. And look, it's still trying to shove YAML down my throat. I don't want YAML. I'll say empty job. So there we go, empty job. So I like this much better because I can now click this little plus and I can see things, I can search for things. In YAML, that's just not there. I've been told they're going to integrate that, right? They're going to have this kind of thing with the YAML, so I'll be able to search for the thing that I want to do. So if I wanted to do, I don't know, like a deployment to Azure, I can type ARM, I can add it, right? And it's going to ask me to configure some steps. I also have the ability, once I do one of those though, to view the YAML, so I can take the YAML and export it and reuse it. So that's an option. This is a hosted agent, so you notice it's saying that it's inherited from the pool. So I will call this out. This is kind of a nice thing to know. So this is the agent pool, so there's a handful. There's this hosted VS 2017 as the default. There's all these different options, but how do you know what's in there? Well, this pool information tab will show you what is installed on this particular hosted agent, right? So lots of stuff, right? All of these tools are already on there. So even if you need to add some additional tooling to a build server, if most of what you have is here, I would probably still use the hosted agent instead of a self-hosted one, and just install whatever I needed before I ran my actions. No need to save it. All right, so let's look at the one that it built for us. So the one that it built for us does a lot of stuff, right? So it's a good starting point, doing the project from the Azure portal, because you do get to see how some of this stuff kind of fits together. There's advanced options for this particular plugin, and these are just native to already as part of Azure DevOps. But you can tap into a marketplace. You can also write your own plugins as well, so lots of flexibility. I can see all the commands I'm executing. You can see my build solution here, test assemblies. It does all these things for me. Functional test, copying my ARM templates up, and then publishing those to my release pipeline. So once again, it has already pre-built for me a release pipeline. So I can see here, there is my artifact. I can see where it's coming from. This is my trigger. In this case, it's enabled. So I'm going to create a new release every time it's getting a new drop or a new artifact from that successful build. This is where I could set my pre and post approval gates. So if I wanted to do a pre-deployment approval, I could select that option here. I can select myself because I'm the only one that's part of this. I can set this, which everyone does set. The user requesting the release should not be the one that approves it, so very important. You can also select to a certain order of approval. So I can say, okay, I want this to be this person approves it, and then once they approve it, the other person gets an email, and they approve it, and then that person gets it, and they approve it. So you can set all that. You can set the timeout. Gates are different tests and things I can run as part of that before it gets there. So in this case, right, I can query work items, I can invoke a function, I can test performance, whatever it is, all has to pass even before it makes it to that point. You can also do that on the back end of a release as well, right? So I can do post-deployment approvals, and then I can do post-deployment gates. So looking in here, what this thing did is it's creating an app service. So part of that process, deploying it from the Azure portal, it actually is spinning up resources in my Azure subscription. So here, this is the web app template.json. So in Azure, the infrastructure is code. It's called ARM templates on our side. They're just JSON files. They're declarative. So basically I say I want an app server of this size running .NET Core or running Linux or Windows or Kubernetes or whatever it is, off it goes. This is overriding parameters in the template. So the template has parameters here. So this is saying where it's deployed to, this is saying the SKU to use. If I was to go in here and edit that and say East US, it would deploy that same thing now in a different region. If I said Singapore or Brazil or wherever, it would now deploy the same exact thing in that location. The deployment mode is referencing ARM itself, so incremental, complete, or validate only. Here's the actual app service itself. There's the code that is uploading, zipping up all of the code that we built in the previous step, and then installing Visual Studio and the test assemblies. So, if we want to make a change, the first thing I would need to do is clone this repo, right? I need to get this repo into my environment. So, got the option here, clone it. I can choose a couple different IDEs to clone directly to there. So VS Code, again, is my default, so I'm actually going to choose that. So yes, I'm going to allow Visual Studio Code to open that. Clone it in my Git repo. Off it goes. Yes, I want to open it in this existing workspace. I don't care about my old workspace. Okay, so my code is now in my environment. I've cloned a repo. I can start making changes, and the thing is, because of how we did that deployment, CI/CD is already set up. So if I make a change here, save it, commit it, push the code, it's gonna push it out immediately to the application. So I don't know here. Let's do something simple. Change the background color. So it's blue. I don't know. Let's make it white. So one thing I'm not doing, and this is something you should always do, is I'm doing work without a work ethic. We never do that. We never do that. We always track our work, right? Because I don't so much care, but I want my boss to know that I'm working.
How will they know the metrics?
I don't care about the metrics. I want them to know that I'm working. But you're right. I mean, yes, it's yeah, I gotta track that. So there's a lot of stuff we don't track. We don't track like burn down rate. We don't track capacity at all on our developers because we feel like, hey, you know how much capacity you got. I'm not gonna track your capacity as a team because you know what you can work on. And if you think you can get it done, put it in the sprint, right? That's it, done, easy enough. We let our people manage that stuff. So there I saved it. I can't remember if I didn't commit it yet. Let's commit it. I commit it white. Made background white. All right, push it, now off it goes. Now this is also a problem, right? Because I just pushed directly to the master. That should not be allowed, right? I am not a big coder, and if anyone knew me, that would definitely not be allowed. So we can fix that, right? So within Azure DevOps, what I would do is I would put a branch policy in place. So if I go in here though and look, I'll have a new build running. Right? So there it is, made background white. It's going to do its thing. But I don't want this. So what I want to do is I want to go to my branch, which I only have the one, and I'm going to set a branch policy. So my branch policy, I've got a couple different options, right? Protecting will do. But I want to build policy. And this is pretty much universal. Everyone has a build policy that they put on master that, you know, before you do anything, it has to pass a certain number of unit tests, and the code coverage has to be a certain level, right? So everyone has this one policy set at a minimum, right? So I pick my pipeline, so I'll pick this pipeline, one pipeline I have, save it, good. All right, so that's done. Now we can validate, we can make a change. I'll change it back, make it blue again. Blue, create. Commit, boom. Should get an error saying, hey, you're not allowed to do that. There we go, great. So it throws an error. So now, of course, I need to create a branch, I need to do some other stuff. But if I did that now, nothing would happen, right? Because I have no build or release tied to this specific branch. So let's do a, let's see, give branch. changes. Oops.
Check out dash B.
Yeah, sorry, check out. There we go. Changes. There we go. So I can push it up there now, but again, nothing can happen. So now I have to build a new pipeline. So I go to builds. I can copy this existing one. So let's clone it. Better name. Build. And now I'll set my triggers. So right now we have a branch filter, right? So it's including master. We do not want to include master. We want to exclude master. And as soon as you do an exclude, you have to do an include. So because I don't know what the branch names could be, I'll just make it asterisk, which means it will pick up everything, and we're going to ignore anything committed to master. So that, yes. Off we go. So now, if I come back here and push my change up to that branch, it should trigger the build. Maybe.
Did it push it?
I think I did. I might just be too quick. Let's see. You know what? Maybe I need to do one other thing.
I just saw the get branch.
Do that. There we go. Commit. One more change. There we go. Going. All right. There it is. This is good. That's what we wanted. So that's going to go. We can check on my release. It's probably going to take a little while because that's one of the other things. The ones you build from the portal. There's quite a lot of automation that they put in there for testing. It takes a long time. I don't know if we necessarily need all of this, but it's much better than our Windows ones where there's like 60,000 tests that happen before anything gets committed to master. That's a real number too. It's a ridiculous amount of tests that happen. So that will be our first one, and then again, we're not going to have a release now off of that dev one because I do not have a dev release tied to it. The trigger for the last one was a build artifact from the other pipeline, not a build artifact from this new pipeline. But we will see an open branch out here. If the build completes successfully, it's actually going to prompt me to say, hey, your build completed, do you want to make a pull request to merge this into master? Pop back out in a second with some other stuff. So this is another big part of what we do at Microsoft and just part of Azure in general is shifting operations left, right? So the whole idea of DevOps is kind of combining these things together, doing things in earlier stages, and this was something. So if you're familiar with our Insiders program, that's basically our no one likes to work beta anymore. Our preview, those are all beta, but everyone calls them preview now. But those are our beta programs because it used to be the method for software delivery was we would be heads down working on something, and 6 months later we release it, and then the CNET reviews and everything come in about how bad this was and that didn't work and this didn't work. It was way too late to fix, right? Way too late. So we have to incorporate feedback earlier. Everyone needs to do this, right? Get that feedback loop much sooner. And I can tell you in the fall creators update, there were 383,000 bugs identified by our preview, our insider community that we actually fixed before the release. A lot of them were feature changes too, so I don't say they're all bugs like software bugs, but some of them were, once you got into that user acceptance kind of area where our engineer thought, this meant that, and then the end user said, no, we don't want the button there, we want it there, that doesn't make any sense, and then we go back and modify it. But much, much better than the old model. Right, so once you get into continuous deployment, CI/CD and all these other things, especially once you get in the cloud, that one on the left is like the most important. Most businesses don't start there, right? Most businesses end up there. I was working with an account in Cleveland, and they were kind of newish to cloud, and they had a developer in Mexico who was brand new to cloud, and he had issues with an app performance. It wasn't performing as well as he thought it should. So there was a slider, and he slid it all the way to the other side. And guess what, man, that app performed great. He loved it, it was fantastic. And then, next month, they got a bill for like $50,000. And that's when they called me in. And I said, oh, you got to start on the left. You need to start on that side, not get there now. Super, super important, and there's lots of ways to do governance and security and control and monitoring and automation. We have something called the Cloud Adoption Framework that's out there. It's fantastic. I love it, but I'll be honest with you, you're probably not going to read it because it's comprehensive. And that means it's really long, like a dictionary is comprehensive. You're not reading that. The Cloud Adoption Framework is incredibly comprehensive. If you do read it, you will be an expert on governance in the cloud. So the whole thing with Azure DevOps is it integrates with everything, right? So I can integrate Jenkins with it as part of my building release process. Maven, I can use Elk Stack to do my monitoring with Grafana dashboards and everything else. Doesn't really matter. It's all very open and extensible. So we'll skip through that slide. Let's get into what we do at Microsoft. This is a fun thing. And I can show some of our live repos of which there's so many. So this is obviously before silos, right? We had silos. There's another slide that I've seen that's better that kind of shows the Microsoft org structure, and it was it was like one section with a handgun pointed at another section, and then the other, everyone's pointing guns at each other. That was kind of the culture at Microsoft, right? Everyone's doing their own thing, and it didn't really matter. So we broke it down. It starts with team structure. So this is all part of DevOps, right? So we've got program management, development, testing, ops folks, security folks, infrastructure folks, all these different people. And we started with kind of a classic model, right? This is where we started. Our first phase of organizational transformation began here, consolidating dev and quality practices, as you would expect in any kind of agile environment. That was phase one. And again, this takes time, right? It took a long, long time. Then we made a feature team. So we basically, looking at it from a DevOps perspective, realized we had to consolidate even further. So we did. So what do those teams look like? This is actually this is probably 4 or 5 years old. One of these old team rooms here. They look quite a bit different now. But they're small, right? So no more than, it says 10 to 12, but really they're smaller than that, typically like 7 to 8 people, typically on one of these teams. Self-managing, they get a clear charter and goals. They work on the thing for 12 to 18 months. So that can change though, right? This is kind of part of Agile. So that 18-month planning, in Azure DevOps, by default, they're called epics, right? Scenarios, whatever you want to call them. This is the big picture. This is set by leadership at Microsoft, right? So then we have a season broken down to 6 months, planning. We do 3-week sprints at Microsoft, and then off we go. Now what's interesting is we actually let teams reorg. So anytime, so it's I think it's 6 months or 12 months, I can't remember which, we let developers pick the team they want to work on. So it's wide open. They can switch at any time. And it's like 80 or 90% of them stay on the team that they're at. And a big part of that, though, is because their managers know that they can switch at any time. So they do whatever they can to try to keep their people happy. They want them to stay on their team. So it's great because, you know, they yield to a lot of concessions because they don't want someone new coming in. They like what they've got, so they try hard to make people happy. So one engineering system is what we call this at Microsoft. It's all built around Azure DevOps. So this gives you kind of an idea of what it looks like. So Microsoft Engineering is, you know, over 100,000 internal users. So lots and lots of engineers. So 4.6 million builds a month. You know, 12,000 employees contributing to open source. You know, tons of open source repos, tons of Git commits, tons of deployments, 82,000 deployments per day. I mean, that's just, it's mind-boggling. So the Azure networking team, this is one of those groups that they do no coding, right? They don't code at all. What these guys are doing is going out and they're looking for, you know, building data centers, laying cable and fiber and like physical connectivity. That's what this group does inside of Azure, right? So what do they use Azure DevOps for? Well, they only use boards. You know, they use it for project tracking, time management. And in fact, internally, MCS, our Microsoft consulting arm, I've seen them start to switch away from Microsoft Project, which if you don't use Project, don't use Project, right? It is, man, talk about a specialized piece of software, like that is for project manager only. But so when I've been engaged with them recently, they'll stand up an Azure DevOps site for a customer. And then it's collaborative, right? So we can have boards, we can have tracking, everyone can see what's going on. Very, very easy to use. That's how they use it. It actually started with our Brazilian MCS team, believe it or not. They were the ones that said, we're not using Project. They went straight to DevOps, and everyone said, oh, that's a pretty good idea. The VS Code team, Bing uses it. The interesting one to me too is the Azure DevOps team. So that one's like Inception. So Azure DevOps is building Azure DevOps using Azure DevOps. It's crazy. But the big one is Windows, right? This is the big one. This is the massive code base, right? This one core code, all these specific additions built on top of this, all these specific drivers for all these things, legacy apps, new apps. It's a lot of code, right? Over 6,000 repos worth of code. That is a lot of code. And that source code is huge. That's so big. So how big is our Windows team? Just doing software engineering on Windows, right? Over 22,000 employees. So the people doing that on Windows are bigger than all these other companies. Just that one part of Microsoft doing that one thing. Server and desktop OS, it's crazy. So these are some fun numbers, right? So almost 4 million commits were done for the fall creators update. So tons and tons of lab builds. I forgot how many lab hours that was. It was insane, the amount of time that was spent on that. Oh, there you go. Yeah, 949 machine meters were used for testing those resources. So that Azure build was a good one. So looking at code, I touched on this earlier about how Git is awesome, but it wasn't awesome for us for that particular product because that's a specialized product. I mean, I think we all acknowledge that. So Git itself is, you know, about 34 megs of code, right? There's not a lot to it. Linux, you know, under a gig. Azure Compute, pretty small, right? So that's all the software behind the compute layer within Azure. VSTS, which is really now Azure DevOps, you know, a little bit bigger. And then there's Windows, the big one. So I mentioned this was a problem, and it was 12 hours if, you know, you didn't close your laptop, or if there wasn't a problem with networking, or if there wasn't some other issue, right? So that's a really, really long time, and that was a problem. So that's when we came up with this, and we've contributed this back to the community, the Git virtual file system. So this helped substantially, right? This made it usable for these things. Really, it was like metadata pointers and things, so when you go to clone the repo, it wouldn't bring it all down, right? Because, you know, no one needed all that code, because the developer was not working on all of those 6,000 repos and all of that source. It was just a specific section. So that's kind of how it worked in the background. So flowing that code for us is also challenging. It's a lot of developers, right? So, hey, it's easy, right? You just branch, you know, commit, do your pull request. That's what it looks like. That's what it looks like for me when I've got like 3 or 4 people that were working on something. It's so easy, right? This is kind of what it looks like for our teams, right? Managing these things. And we use a process primarily called Git flow, which you can look up. There's lots of info about Git flow. We don't use exactly the Git flow process for branching and branch strategy, but it's pretty close to that. But we do it to isolate development, and then we kind of push it downstream. So most of the work is happening on these feature branches, right? So once you get up, right, you see many fewer builds. Once you get to the master branch, many fewer changes. Even less so, in the integration, you're not seeing a whole lot of activity there because we're pushing it down further into the stack. And where we're doing it is we have branch owners, right? So this is the only way to kind of make this workable, because we couldn't have, a million feature branches and then someone always reviewing to see if they should merge into master. It doesn't make sense with that much code coverage. So basically each branch owner is responsible for managing their section of their feature branch and determining when the code is stable enough to ask for that PR and merge into master. So the payload's moved up via reverse integration, and it comes down to forward branches from forward integration. So this is also kind of one of the challenges, because you think about all of that happening at once, and those PRs are coming in and master is changing, right? So there has to be a process to continually keep those feature branches up to date too, because they very quickly get out of date, and then once I go to merge, there's all this conflict. So it's a challenge, right? And we're still working on it, right? It's not perfect yet. So again, the branch owner is responsible for all of these things: test results, failure triage. It's working relatively well for us, I'll be honest with you. And then we do a ton of self-hosting. Self-hosting is super, super important. So this is really where we're getting a lot of bang for our buck, is with self-host. And internally at Microsoft, they push everyone, doesn't matter what your position is in the field, to self-host. So I am not running the weekly new release of Windows 10 because I really need my laptop, right? And I'm nervous about that release, but they ask me all the time. They're like, you really should be, it says recommended. You're recommended to be on the canary list. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what if it breaks? Like, what do I do? I'm sunk. So isolation is great challenges. I kind of talked about, why that's the case in terms of being able to, have all those changes happening at the same time and have those feature branches get out of date. So it's still something that we're working on, and we're working to bring what we're doing there with this pre-check-in validation into Azure DevOps. So that will be a new feature that will get released at some point once we kind of get this kind of figured out. It's a specialized use case, don't get me wrong, not everyone's going to need this. But for larger environments, it does make a lot of sense. So the way it kind of works is like this. We've got our working branch here. There we go. So the last changes are synced to these rolling builds. They're happening all the time. Those are prepped. Then we have a topic branch. Developers are making changes. Again, the code gets checked in there. Scope for those changes from dev that were already tied up there off that rolling build, so it's relatively current. Did it succeed? If yes, okay. Now we go into our unit testing and code coverage testing. We run a tool also called cred scan internally. That's a very important one. Checks code for credentials or secret keys or whatever it may be to make sure we don't expose those anywhere. But that's kind of the process. So look for that soon, and I don't know what that means. It's very vague in Azure DevOps, which is changing all the time, just like everything else. So let's see here. Did our color change? When we make it white? Yeah, that was a great choice. Perfect. I'd merge that right away.
Ship it.
Yeah, ship it. It's good to go. I want to be in a different. Okay. So this is actually one of the Azure DevOps project repos here. Zoom in a little bit here. So this is over the last 7 days, right? I can see there are 1,000 work items created, a lot of pull requests open. Pretty good, successful builds there. Deployments, not so much. And I was looking at a release pipeline that it had never succeeded. I mean, I saw like 50. I never saw a good, successful release. So that could be skewing that number. Dashboard view, there's a bunch here. So again, these are customizable. They can be shared. You can have your own personal ones. I'm not even sure what this one is. User engagement, accessibility, bug bashers, looking good.
have a question.
Yeah.
Who can see all this stuff? Every developer or only DevOps who deal with this?
So who?
How you are adding new developer to your pipeline?
Yeah.
To your project?
Uh-huh. So you can scope permissions a lot of different ways, right? So I can set people to have read-only access. I can set access to certain parts of DevOps. So if I look at one of these projects,
So they should have Azure account?
you do not have to have an Azure account. No, in fact, when I switched because my deployment failed, I'm actually logged in with my Gmail account in this particular DevOps org. Yeah. It is quite easy though to collaborate, right? So I can invite people. Again, they don't have to be a member of Azure or anything. We're looking through here, right? So these are a bunch of different groups within this environment. Lots of different security options here for locking stuff down. I won't bore you with, like I said, RBAC is always a nightmare, but there's a lot of customized options, notification options. I can pick and choose when I want to get alerted. And I didn't show it, but I filtered my DevOps messages. I probably had a few failed releases and some other things from earlier. Or successful growth. Oh, actually, you know what? I take that back. Use my Gmail account. Use my Gmail account.
What program is that you just had open?
Outlook.
Oh.
Yeah. Good old Outlook. That's probably a big code base too. It's been around a while, also. Not as big as Windows, but I'm sure it's beefy.
It only takes 8 hours to clone.
Yeah. Yeah. Even with the changes.
Yeah, even if we virtualize.
Yeah. Let's see what else we got here. So I think this one, this is like a real one, not one we just spin up. So here's actually a build happening right now. So this one is running, and these are going all the time. Actually, there's a bunch of concurrent builds happening right now. So client side retry for billing tab. They're fixing a bug, it looks like. And then here I can watch in real time what's happening, which there's a lot happening here. This particular pipeline. Let's go back to the stuff here. Yep, so there we go. Change impact analysis, set PR retention period, tagging the job, running the script, doing code coverage. Now we're building, and we're gonna do all these other things. Okay, publish test results, validate test results. All those things will happen. So that one's gonna take a little while to run. That's also why having concurrent build agents is super, super helpful. Once that's done, it's gonna go to a release, of which I'm sure there are a handful that are going. So this was the one right here that I never saw a successful release. So it looks like we're still not successful with whatever they're trying to do here. Failing every time. This is actually an important call out though, because setting up these pipelines a lot of times takes work, it takes effort. It takes time to tweak them and tune them and get them the way you want them to be. Once you get them to that point, they're hands up, right? They're fantastic. It looks like they're probably trying to get this pipeline to do what they want it to do. And for the past 2 months, it's not working.
Been there. Been there, done that.
They take a while. So let's see what this thing looks like here. So there's 57 tasks in this and 221 tests. So that one could take a while to figure out. I mean, there's a lot of work happening with this particular pipeline. So the testing is looking good. That's good. We had a handful of failures, but most of them are passing.
So for this, you're using dev.azure.com, which
Yeah.
is the regular URL that we all use nowadays, or should be using soon.
Instead of like the Visual Studio.
Yeah, the whole
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
I mean, so is this using the released
Yep.
Azure DevOps
Yep.
as of today?
Yep. This is current. Yeah, this is not a secret dev one. This is not the inception of DevOps inside DevOps.
So I'm
Yeah.
guessing then that the extras, like on the right side, like compliance and those other things, are just extensions that
There
they
are,
have
yeah.
built?
So you know what? That's a good call. So you're seeing some extra stuff in here. There's like stuff down here, one branch, this is unique to us. So you can customize your environment a lot of different ways, and we do have a lot of custom things that we've built. And there are a lot of third-party vendors out there. So I work with a company that does a lot of healthcare and device manufacturing, and their FDA, you have to go through an FDA approval process. So they've got some very strict requirements and guidelines on documentation and certification, and they have to have that as part of this process. So they've got a third-party app they plug into the environment that does all their automation of code and writing some of the FDA compliance stuff, which is it's pretty slick.
What's that stuff on the bottom with performance and SQL and REST and what's all that cool stuff?
That actually might be, is that my, no, that's not my BSTS. Or my, that's a good question. I've never even noticed that.
Looks kind of like mini profiler.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
Just looks really cool. I was wondering why it is.
That could be actually one of those custom things too. I'm not sure. Let's see. No, it looks like it's part of it. We didn't talk about variables, but these are specific pipeline variables here. So they're reusing these variables within the pipeline. And then you've also got the ability to do variable groups. Those are under libraries. So the most common use case for something like a variable group would be linking to secrets or keys or things that you can want in the code. Leverage those. And on the Azure side, it would be something like Azure Key Vault that would store those secrets or keys or certificates. And then your pipeline would then pull them as part of the deployment process. So the developer wouldn't ever see or know what those secrets were to be able to do anything on their own. Everything would have to come from the pipeline. And then you can audit the access and everything else. PRs, I'm not sure. Let's see if there's no active ones. I don't have any waiting out there for me. Oh, there are a couple active, none for me. Handful here. Completed, abandoned. You can look at all the different branches. There's probably a ton in this particular repo. So there are a bunch of branches. I just don't want to click on these things. Developers will own their own branches, and they'll typically, they should be naming them after the work they're doing. But yeah, just tons of stuff. Repos is not always intuitive, but just know that I will drop down and show you the other repos you've got available. So again, in this project, this Azure DevOps project, there is a ton of repos that are part of this. Browsing files in them, I can look at the branches in here. I can look at history of these files. I'm not even sure if there's any changes in this one that I picked. Not a lot of changes in this one. All right, well that was about all I had, unless anyone's got any questions or wants to know more.
Yeah, so if I have like a gig project, I have servers that are not on Azure, would I be able to use Azure to build them, like you said, if they're public or free builds?
Yeah.
And then could I push that to
Push it anywhere.
other hosting service?
Yeah, you can push it anywhere. Doesn't matter. Yeah, this is independent of Azure. So like I said, it's not a great name. Azure DevOps. Everything's built on Azure at this point for us, really on the back end. But this works with anything.
Okay.
Yeah. And in fact, actually, let's see. Let's see if I look at one of mine here. Extensions. Well, we might even have the release pipeline. deployment, so there's all these here out of the gate. Obviously all Azure heavy, but you've got options here. I wonder if there's any native ones for Amazon in here. Yeah, there you go. There's your Amazon tool, S3 upload. And again, these are just native right now in here. There's more on them. Oh no, that's Marketplace, so you have to go to Marketplace to grab that one. But yeah, any tool you want. Yes.
Question, so, do you have any migration tools or documentation for like moving TFS from
Yeah.
the ground?
Yeah, there's a tool. Shoot me an email, I'll get you this stuff, because there's,
Yeah, the other things like everybody has their custom pipelines,
Yeah.
Jenkins or
yep,
whatever.
yep.
Do you
Yeah,
guys
so we've got
support
a tool and a pretty good migration process. But I want you to send me an email, because
Sure.
it can be a little involved.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And to note too, so this is actually one of the, it's in the backlog. I take it back, it's not in the backlog yet, it's very, very frequently asked, is moving work items between different projects. So I'm in this particular project, and if I have a fully built out environment with all my boards and work items and everything, but now I wanna build a new project, it's how do I get the stuff between them, and the answer right now is you kind of don't, right? It's a manual process, and you have to develop some sort of scripting or do something. It's been asked a lot, so I think we'll see it at some point. Vote for it if that's a feature you want. I know it's one that I want, so.
I really liked your presentation, but I don't really know DevOps.
Yeah.
Like, I get what you're doing on Azure DevOps, but like you said, it's kind of different. They're two different things.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what CI/CD is. What's like the first baby step to get that part down so I can remember like the other half of the things?
To get the agile like methodology down?
Well, like CI/CD, is that specific to Azure DevOps?
No.
Or, okay.
That's like an agile methodology. So continuous integration, continuous deployment, build and release, same thing, right? So, and not everyone does both, right? You can do one of the, and you can still do agile without doing those things, to be honest with you. I mean, in my opinion, I mean, someone might argue with me on that, but you can do a lot without doing CI/CD. But yeah, it's all about when I check in code. Again, so you saw, you know, from my experience as a developer, was hitting save, committing my code, and then pushing it, and then that's it. That's all I do. But on the back end, what's happening is again that build process, the automated testing process, scanning for credentials, doing whatever, doing documentation, everything that happens automatically. And then once you get to the CD portion, which is then, okay, I'm not only going to do my automated testing and building, but I'm also now going to start releasing all the time. So that's the CI/CD.
Okay.
And I think if you look back at the history, I think it started with, I think it was Flickr was the company that everyone credits with writing the first, public article on doing continuous deployments when they were doing like 23 deploys a day, which back then was unheard of because you said you were 18, you probably don't even know what the hell Flickr is. The picture thing now. It was good for a while, until they started charging.
You said it real quick, so I missed it, but I think you call it Fred code or Fred test, a process for testing for credentials.
Cred scan.
Say it again.
Cred scan.
Cred scan.
Yeah,
Versus
so.
Fred. Why would I say Fred?
So that is unfortunately a Microsoft internal tool. But I have been pushing to get them to release it open source. So if you Google that on Bing, you can no one you'll find some articles out there about it. But it's for whatever reason. I think they've released maybe a sanitized version of it in the marketplace, but it's not quite as easy to use. But there's other things out there too that do similar things.
So does this replace a local install version of Visual Studio and Team Foundation Server?
So TFS, yes, it would replace, right? So not Visual Studio. I mean, you would still need, that's the IDE side. It only replaces the TFS side of things. Yeah, this is like the new version of TFS. It's really what it is. And a lot of the same things still apply. Even if you go to the documentation, it'll say like this article applies to TFS version 2016, Azure DevOps. There is an on-prem version of this too, so if you didn't want to use the hosted version, there is. I forgot, I think it's called Azure DevOps 2019.
Azure DevOps server.
Server 2019. Yes, Azure DevOps server.
Azure on your own server.
I don't know. They put Azure in every name. This is how it is. Alright, anything else?
Is there a way to leverage, Blue-green deployments at all, or?
So that's a Kubernetes thing, right?
Yeah.
So that's very common there. So here's an interesting thing. I just did a DevOps hack on Blue-green deployments using Kubernetes and Helm and Azure DevOps. So I mentioned earlier that some people think Kubernetes is going to be a bump in the road, and it's not going to be here to stay. So I was actually working with a startup out of Philly who was doing all app services and serverless and functions and everything in Azure. And they were there to learn about Kubernetes. And they said the same thing. We hope it's a bump in the road because we're using these other things, and why would we use Kubernetes? So we have app service, right? So like hosting a Linux app, like .NET, whatever. It's a web application thing. Part of that has things in there, and actually, I didn't destroy my environment yet. So if I look at my app service, I have these things in here called deployment slots. I don't have any configured, but if I added a slot here, which I might need to upgrade my plan, there we go. I can clone the settings, I can keep them the same, fine, there it goes. So now when I go to do my deploy, I can choose which slot it goes into. So that's already there. So I don't need to do Blue, I don't need to check which one. And I can also do testing in production. I can send a certain amount of traffic to one slot versus the other. That's built in. And that's what they were doing. And I'm like, okay. So then we spent the next week building a Blue-green deployment and Helm charts and everything else. And it was awesome, and it worked great. But it required a whole lot of work to do it. And so Kubernetes is so powerful, you can build anything. And I've actually seen us say we could re-platform all of Azure to run on Kubernetes. The whole thing. We could containerize all of it and run it all in Kubernetes. But it just, sky's the limit, but you have to build it. That's the thing. So the way you would do it here, though, really was redeployment for your Kubernetes cluster, and you would add a step in your, likely your release pipeline that would query the cluster and check for the slot and say, which slot is it now? Is production in blue or is it in green? And then you would pass that as a variable to the next step in the pipeline. It would then say, okay, you're going to set the current, the production slot to be blue, if it's green, and then deploy to that slot. Yeah, but you just have to add that step in the pipeline to query the cluster to get to return which the current deployment is. So they may build that in natively. Right now, it's a shell script that you basically run, wrap it on the output, and send it back to the pipeline.
So, does this work only with a Visual Studio you install on the Microsoft Cloud server? Or
Works with anything. Any ID, doesn't matter. Yep, you can edit your code in Notepad. As long as you have Git on your machine, you can do a commit to a repo, you're good to go.
I'm wondering if this question is more along the lines as far as publishing. If you publish it, you're only allowed to publish to cloud services.
Nope.
So you can
Publish on-prem. Yep. I've got customers doing it. So they're using this, they're using hosted pipelines. They're not hosting their own build agents. And they're actually pushing code to an IIS server in their data center. Works fine.
It's very flexible.
Yeah. Anything else? Last the hook? Is it
I think
beer
you are.
o'clock yet? We got talking about beer.
Thanks, Eric. Oh, yep, I'll get that.
Andrew, doctor, right?
If I can.